Nearly 4 years after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the attacks continue, relentless, deadly, every single day. Talks about a ceasefire may be underway, but Vladimir Putin keeps pushing the war forward. With infrastructure deliberately reduced to rubble, millions in Ukraine are left freezing in the dark. No heat, no power, no relief, and still no sign of Putin backing down, despite staggering losses on the battlefield and an economy sliding deeper into trouble. Can the negotiations the United States is steering in the Gulf actually stop the bloodshed? What price will Ukraine be forced to pay? And what is the mood inside Russia itself? On To The Point, we ask today, fighting and negotiating, how strong is Russia? Hello and welcome to The Point. Let me introduce my panel. Anastasia Tikhomirova, a Russian-German journalist. She works for the German weekly Zeit. Before the war, she worked among other outlets for Novaya Gazeta in Moscow. And Stephen Erlanger, a correspondent for the New York Times, who's also been a correspondent in Moscow. The security expert, Nico Lange. And joining us from Aarhus in Denmark, Jeremy Morris, professor for Russian and Global Studies at the University of Aarhus. He is one of the last Western scientists to still travel to Russia. And I'd like to start with Jeremy straight away. Jeremy, very briefly, is Russia serious about these peace negotiations?
Well, I can't really speak to what's going on in the minds of the Russian negotiators or in the minds of the security elite that clearly are driving the war. But my point would be to point to the economic deterioration across the board in Russia as the only thing that will really make a difference, perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but in the medium term.
We'll come to the economic situation in Russia a bit later in the program. Nico, I would like to ask you, Russia's war against Ukraine has now lasted longer than Russia's fight against Nazi Germany. How has Ukraine managed to hold out for so long?
Well, first of all, Putin started this war on the basis of false premises. But he has no intention to stop. I also don't think he is seriously negotiating. I mean, he might be negotiating to win and might be negotiating to have Trump deliver him politically what he could not achieve militarily. Ukraine is holding on because it's an existential fight for the Ukrainian nation, for being Ukrainian. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also a sign of not only Putin's miscalculation, but of Russia not being as strong as many people believe. So we should not start all our thinking based on the hypothesis that in the end Russia will win. Russia might lose this, and we should help Ukraine beating Russia.
Anastasia, is that the reason that Russia is reluctantly entering into negotiations?
I think Putin is entering in negotiations. His reasons are tactical. He's trying to save us some time in order to devastate Ukrainian population, Ukrainian people, in order to bomb Ukraine into a humanitarian catastrophe. So Ukrainian people will finally, what he hopes, give up. Mm-hmm. And also Western societies will get a certain fatigue in order to not support Ukraine anymore. When we look into Russia, the Russian people feel a certain sort of fatigue. 66%, according to the newest Levada study, are wishing for the war to end. But when you ask these people on which terms, 60% will not be ready to give up the conquered Ukrainian territories. And also the majority of them want Ukraine to surrender. So many Russians are holding hopes that Trump somehow will help Russia to achieve what it wants.
Mm. Now, some say we're closer to a breakthrough than we ever were in the past 4 years. Do you share that view?
Well, and the fact that they're all talking together, even at a technical level, is an improvement. Trump's in a hurry, to be sure. The problem is Trump's bought the Russian narrative. I mean, Trump wants Ukraine to give up the rest of the Donbas, which I think the Ukrainians generally agree is a bad idea. And Zelensky's under a great deal of pressure. Trump thinks he's the problem. He accepts, which I disagree, but he accepts that Ukraine should be part of the Russian sphere of influence, the Ruski Mir, and that Russia has a right to its zone of influence, much as America does in the Western Hemisphere and Xi Jinping does in China. So the Europeans who are trying to support Zelensky are really negotiating with the Americans first, and then we'll go see what Putin thinks, which I think will probably be negative. So we may be marginally closer. I don't see the war ending very soon, to be honest.
Let's have a look at Russia. Putin's strategy of maximal demands seems to be paying off for now. On the other side, he faces a US president eager for a quick peace, almost at any price. But the war is also steadily weakening Russia.
Putin does not care about casualties. He does not care about people. According to NATO estimates, more than 1 million soldiers have already been killed or wounded on the Russian side. Can Putin still mobilize enough people for the war? Putin has committed his country to wartime economics. This year, 40% of total government spending will go to defense and security agencies. But the war economy boom appears to be over. And new growth forecasts are poor, standing at just 1%. Ukrainian attacks on Russia's gas and oil facilities are also having a growing impact. So are boycotts against the country. The so-called Russian shadow fleet, which transports oil illegally, is also being combated more aggressively. Russian state revenues from oil and gas could fall by almost half compared to last year. This is because the EU has just decided to halt imports on Russian gas altogether by 2027. But despite growing war fatigue, President Putin's approval ratings remain high in Russia. His system continues to rely on militarization, propaganda, and repression. How long will this be effective?
Yes, and I'd like to pass that question on to Jeremy. Jeremy, the Center for Strategic and International Studies argues that Russia is trading tiny battlefield gains for long-term decline, sliding toward a second or even third-tier economy. Do you agree?
Yes, I largely agree. I mean, what the clip just showed is not just that Europe is decoupling its energy dependence from Russia, but that in the long term, Russia's bets on trading hydrocarbon revenue for the ability to wage war is a losing bet, because the result just after a relatively short period, sure, it's longer than the Great Patriotic War, but 4 years or so, already the Russian economy is really in a downward spiral of stagnation, high inflation, which is not even effectively recorded statistically, so it's probably higher than the government admits, significant deficit spending for an economy that historically exported far more than it imported, and lowering standards of living. And so we can point to polls that say, you know, Russians wouldn't accept a peace at any costs, or we can look at polls that say Putin's popularity is high, but these are kind of going to be increasingly meaningless in a repressive society against the backdrop of falling living standards. And I would also remind that, you know, Russians have extremely bitter memories of falling living standards, and they almost always led to significant political change.
Nico, is there any evidence on the battlefield of this economic decline?
Yes. I mean, you see Russia sending infantry soldiers into certain death every day, thousands of them. 35,000 in December alone. There are no armored vehicles, or there is no mighty Russian army. It's poor men that are sent into Ukrainian drones, killing them. So this is not a superpower waging war. It's a small-scale infantry fighting. Russia is not strong. Russia is brutal. And it's the brutality that scares us, especially the Europeans. The Russian economy calculation from a Putin point of view, of course, would change if he wins. He would probably say to all that, yes, that might all be true, but the calculation will change once I have won in Ukraine and subordinated Europe. Because then, very much to the traditions of the Russian Empire, I will extract the wealth from the territories I conquered or from my neighbors that I put under military pressure. So this is for Putin, this is a temporary snapshot. The calculation might change in his view.
Do you think that as long as he has soldiers, young men, that he can send into the meat grinder, he'll go on?
Well, I think he will go on. I think he is understanding that Trump is his best chance of getting a result he can sell at home. Now, the issue is the Donbas. Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, keeps saying, it's just a real estate deal, it's just a piece of land, you'll have guarantees if you give it up. But of course, politically, it's pretty impossible for Ukraine. It's also kind of disgusting, by the way, given that the land has not been conquered. And I do think that Russia is under economic pressure, but Putin's not under a lot of political pressure yet. And certainly the people I talk to think Russia can prosecute this war well into next year, despite its economic difficulties. It's paying more money in bonuses to get meat grinder fodder, young men to come. They've used North Koreans, they've used all kinds of ethnic minorities. There's a lot of poverty in Russia. And a lot of young men think, well, the money is so good, even if I die, I will have done something great for my family. They will live much better than I. So it's an ugly equation, but it's a legitimate one.
We've just had fresh figures from the Center for Strategic Studies, 1.2 million casualties on the Russian side, estimated 325 of those dead. How present is that in Russia's society?
It's almost not present, as the propaganda is very strong. So in the propaganda...
But aren't people talking to each other and aren't these figures filtering through somehow?
Not really. So you have to see that, for example, in Moscow, where the support for the imperial war is one of the highest, still not many people are being mobilized. As you said, it's mostly people from poor regions, it's mostly indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, or guest workers, or even North Koreans who are being sent into this war, or contract soldiers. So people are being paid very high wages in order to go on Ukrainian soil and kill. This even leads to a new elite that is prospering while this war is going on. So the grief for those soldiers who go and fight for money is very low, let's say that. And also prisoners, former prisoners, are being sent to the war, hundreds of thousands of them. So this is why the collective grief, as it was back then 80 years ago, when Russia or the Soviet Union was fighting against the Nazis, the collective grief was there. But right now we don't have this, as people are saying, okay, they're fighting on their free will, they're fighting for money. There is a small group that is grieving the young soldiers that are being forcefully sent into Ukraine, but right now their number is shrinking, so it's not really discussed publicly.
I mean, all of us here have been at some point living and working in Russia. And I think we can confirm empathy and kindness are not the most significant features of Russian society. It's a tradition of the Russian Empire, of the Soviet Empire. So we should not apply our categories of human dignity and the value of human life to what is going on in Russia.
The Russian society is very atomized, so people only care for themselves and maybe their families. And when I'm being asked, are people noticing what is happening in Ukraine? Not at all. Like, for example, feel some sort of responsibility, collective responsibility for being Russian and what is being done in my name to a neighboring country, a genocidal war. But when we look onto Russian society, only 8 or even less % are feeling some sort of shame or guilt. And this is a very big problem.
There are even numbers, and we'll come to you in a second. There are estimates that 15 to 20% of Russians could be described as hardened, xenophobic, imperialists and militarists. Would you agree?
Well, that's always been part of Russian society, to be honest. I mean, it's always thought of itself as the third Rome, not exactly Western, having a different set of civilizational values. But I would say the repressive part of the regime is pushing people back to the way they behaved under the Soviet Union, in the sense that they have kitchen table conversations that are very honest. They have drunk conversations, which are very honest. In public, people keep their mouths shut because they get into trouble, and social media is very complicated. So it's actually very hard to know what Russians really think in bulk, because they lie to pollsters, because it's in their best interests. It's always been. I think
polls are not necessarily accurate.
Well, Levada's pretty good. I mean, they're pretty accurate. I mean, they give you a sense, but it's a bit like polling in Gaza. You know, it's like, it's very difficult. It's not as scientific. I do think Putin has successfully argued that this is a defensive war to defend the Russian world against Western encroachment and Western values, including gender equality, homosexuality, secularism. This is partly a cultural and war, a civilizational war. He's argued this, and many Russians accept this.
While negotiations are beginning, Putin is once again using winter as a weapon, targeting Ukraine's energy grid to force blackouts. Russia has attacked Ukraine's energy system in previous winters as well. The only difference now is that's for the first time negotiations are happening at the same time.
Russia is terrorizing Ukraine, and Kharkiv, the country's second largest city, is being heavily bombarded with drones and missiles. The targets are not only residents, but also energy facilities. During freezing temperatures, 1.2 million households were temporarily without electricity and many without heating. Cold has become a weapon, and people are suffering. This woman has been waiting in her apartment for days, cooking on this gas stove. She says that she's exhausted living without heat, water, light, and without hope. The situation is increasingly desperate. The U.S. has scaled back its military aid to the country, and even though Europe has pledged around 70 billion euros in military aid, Zelensky is disappointed.
Things move faster than Europe, and how can Europe keep up?
Peace talks are bringing all parties to the same table: Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S. And they're offering hope. But key issues remain unresolved, especially concerns on territorial concessions and security guarantees. Russia is making extreme demands, and the U.S. is pushing Ukraine to compromise. Who will prevail?
Well, that's one of the real crunch points. I believe the territory question. Can Zelensky actually give in to these demands? Will he have to?
First of all, it's a very big success of Russia that we are discussing day in, day out. What are the concessions Ukraine is making? I mean, Ukraine is the victim of an aggression. And we know from our own history from 1938 that giving concessions to an aggressor does not end well. I wonder why we are repeating this and are always coming back to the question. If you listen to Yuri Uzhakov, who is very important in this, Putin's foreign and security policy advisor, you can only get the understanding that giving up Donbas is just the beginning of a process. There will be more demands. So I think it's an illusion on the Witkoff and Trump side to believe it's just that one thing and then ceasefire and peace will come. Witkoff has a history of misunderstanding things. He does not speak Russian. He does sometimes not even bring his own translator to this. So what is really true? What did he really discuss with the Russians? And that's a plus I see now that, for example, Kirilo Budanov and the Admiral Kostyukov from the Russian military intelligence service, I think they talked about prisoners exchange before. They have a way of talking to each other in a professional way. And we can find out and sense what the Russian position really is on issues. But I would not expect a quick result or a certain ceasefire. Maybe there is a chance for sectoral ceasefire, because we should not forget that Ukraine is inflicting pain on Russia with strikes that go deep, with energy infrastructures that are damaged, also with ships that are sunken, but also with special operations. Think about Operation Spiderweb or think about killed generals. So maybe helping Ukraine to increase the pressure for this might be at least leading to a discussion about sectoral ceasefire, which is not the big deal. But to be honest, I do not believe in sudden big bam deals anyway. And we should not buy into this logic. It's a Trump logic, but it's not the logic of peace processes.
It's the first time that in this peace process that Russia and Ukraine are talking directly to each other than with a prisoner exchange. Do you think that will make a difference?
Well, it's the first time since the beginning of the war when they were talking in Istanbul. Those came to nothing. Look, Trump wants it done. Zelensky's under a great deal of pressure. I do believe that Putin sees Trump as his great ally in this, but it's hard, Trump floats around. It was Greenland yesterday, it'll be Iran tomorrow, they may come back to Ukraine. He's got the Board of Peace to worry about. He's looking for quick victories. The problem for me, for European supporters of Ukraine, is there's money involved, which is great, but Europe has no strategy for ending the war unless Donald Trump starts pressuring Vladimir Putin to end the war. And that's not going to happen. At least I don't see it happening. So I share the general pessimism that it will happen very soon. Also, don't forget, Russia doesn't want a ceasefire. Russia wants a peace settlement. That's going to take a lot longer. I mean, Russia wants to continue the war till there's a final settlement, and it has other demands, which include a change in the strategic architecture of NATO and Western Europe. So, I mean, a final deal has a long way to go. I hope for a sectoral ceasefire, like we'll stop hitting each other's energy. But clearly Russia is trying to destroy Ukraine's infrastructure. And this is the first time it's gone after all these big central heating plants. So it is a very cold, dark winter, even in Kiev.
But giving up will not, by the way, I mean, if you want to force Ukraine into submission, the electricity and the heat will not come back if you give up. Yeah, it's a little bit paradox, because the infrastructure is destroyed now.
Jeremy, do you agree that a sectoral ceasefire would be a step forward?
Yeah, I do. But like all of the speakers, I think, around this table, we shouldn't have any illusions that that's likely, at least in the next year. I mean, we shouldn't obviously focus too much on the United States, but it has to be said that the midterm elections will significantly change things at the end of this year. So, like in the last 3 years, essentially, if we're going to be careful about our predictions, we have to say things will change, but not necessarily soon. I mean, I just want to come back to some of the points that are made. Yes, Zelensky is under pressure, but he doesn't have to give any concessions. If the European Union can step up and really incrementally replace some of the intelligence support and military support that the United States gave. So we shouldn't like lull ourselves into this extreme pessimism, which seems to be almost like a failing of European politics when, Europe is bigger, if not richer than the United States. And, I would be the first person to say that Russia still has a lot of economic and military capacity, but Russia is a small player in contrast to the European Union, whether it is in terms of economy, demography, industrial capacity.
Jeremy,
so
I'm afraid I have to interrupt you because we're coming to the end of the program. I'd just like to ask around very, very quickly for everyone, could these Abu Dhabi talks become a new Munich? Concessions today, aggression tomorrow. Very briefly, please.
I'm afraid not. I think Putin's just saving time in order to get what he wants.
Nico?
No, but Abu Dhabi must be the signal to the Europeans to force themselves into this and force themselves to the table. Daddy will not do it for us.
I agree with that. I don't see this ending very soon, but I do think it's positive that they're talking to each other, at least on a fairly technical level.
Jeremy, what about your views?
Yeah, people should definitely talk to each other, but they shouldn't expect the Russians to make any concessions in the short term.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to leave it here. Our time is up. That's it from us here at the table and from the To The Point team. We hope you found our discussion as interesting as we did. If so, leave us a comment in the comment section here below if you're watching us on YouTube. Thanks for watching. See you next week.